Okay, so before we get started, we're going to get in a minute, we'll continue on. I just wanted to say over one thing, Lila Nishmaso. I may have said this to a couple of you before. It's a gewaldige insight from the Chidah HaKadosh, who Chaim Azulai, who lived in the, I guess, 1700s. He was a Makubal, and his insights on Torah and beyond are just really incredibly powerful. So, apropos to Rosh Chodesh, I just want to make this final mention because today's Rosh Chodesh davening, tomorrow, is the last of the leap year, of the Adar Beis year. And as we know, in Adar Beis, in the year of the leap year, we say an extra couple of words in the repeating of the Shemona Esrei. We say Kaparas Posha, that among everything else, all the brachas that the Rosh Hashanah should give Klal Yisrael, they should give a kapara. Kaparas Posha, kapara. So the question, of course, the obvious question is, what does that mean? What's the pshat? That in a leap year and in Adar Beis, you say Kaparas Posha, otherwise not. What does all that mean? So the Chidah HaKadosh has a tremendous insight, and his insight stems from a pasuk in Parshas Miketz. The Torah says in Parshas Miketz, Perek Mem Gimel Pasuk Yud, if you want to remember to look at it because it's something to think about. This is the exchange between Yehuda and Yaakov about the capture of Binyamin by Yosef. Of course, they didn't know Yosef at the time, but Yaakov didn't send Yehuda, right? He didn't send Yehuda. And Yehuda, because Yehuda had a taina to his father, and he says to his father in Pasuk Yud, Ki lule hismamonu, if you hadn't delayed in sending me, ki ato shavnu ze pamoim, twice I could have brought back Binyamin already from captivity. So look what happened here. Binyamin is in captivity. We sent one shliach, they said Ruvain, and Veinenu, he's not here. If you had sent me, I promised you, like my own children, that I would bring him out. Says the Chidah as follows. Let's look at the words. Ki lule hismamonu. In other words, you haven't delayed. Lule is Lamed Vav Lamed Aleph, spelled backwards is Elul. Elul. If ki lule hismamonu means to delay. If you delayed in Elul and didn't do tshuva in Elul, where you're supposed to do tshuva before Rosh Hashanah, but if you didn't do tshuva, then there's a unique opportunity. Ki ata, now, shavnu zeh. Zeh is Zayin Hey. Zayin Hey is 12. When zeh is pamoyim, when zeh is twice, meaning Adar Beis, when zeh, the 12th month, is pamoyim, you have a chance to do tshuva one more time. That's the way the Chidah interprets the pasuk to explain why we say Kaporos Posha on a Shnat Ibur, because there's a unique opportunity in that year. It doesn't apply to any other year. It applies to a Shnat Ibur. You have it when Zeh is Pamoyim, and you didn't do tshuva in Elul, you have a chance to do tshuva. This Adar Beis is the last month that we will say it. Tomorrow, Shemona Esrei will be the last Shemona Esrei in which we will say Kaporos Posha until the next Iber Yor, Yetz Hashem. So we have to keep that in mind always, that the tshuva opportunity that Rabbi Shalom gives us, Elul, gives us Rosh Hashanah, gives us Yom Kippur, Hoshana Rabbah, and in some years he even gives you Adar Beis, even gives you even more. Especially this year when we're under such a powerful force of tragedy for Klal Yisrael, then Kaporos Posha is, there was never more a need for Kaporos Posha than there is now, right? So I just want to say that with that insight that the Chidah brings out, that it's never too late for tshuva. Tshuva, you can say personally, publicly, we say Tehillim, we say everything, but tshuva is that powerful force that gives us all a reprieve in the eyes of the Rebbeinu Shalom. Never too late. So therefore, we should learn from this that even in the last moments of a Ibur Yor, Shnat Ibur, and we still have that last faint opportunity to do tshuva, we have to pray to the Baruch Shalom, as we do all the time, and we should ask for tshuva, mechila, kapara, and in that schus, Klal Yisrael will have the nechama, and hopefully all of what we're undergoing now will only be the prelude to the Geula Shlema b'meher b'yameinu. Okay, so I wanted to say that over, and now we're going to continue on Perek Daled, with the fourth Perek, Nun Aleph Amid Beis. Okay, Nun Aleph Amid Beis, and we're going to pick up from where we left off, where we have a discussion. Just to briefly summarize, there's a machlekes Rav and Shmuel. If a person says Harei Alai Ano, that you can have no taina of fraud on me in a deal, whether or not those words stick. Rav says it doesn't stick. You can still have a taina on him, and Shmuel says you can. And then the Gemara wants to extrapolate that machlekes Rav and Shmuel is also the machlekes between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. If a man says to his betrothed that even though I'm obligated under the Torah to give you she'er ksus va'ona, of sustenance and shelter and comfort, but I am going to not give it to you. So he says it speaks it out. That's the condition of our marriage. So here too is a machlekes Reb Meir, Reb Yehuda. Reb Meir says absolutely not. You can't thwart an issa midaraisa. And Reb Yehuda parses, and he says an issa d'oraisa dealing with mamanis, with money, that you can be meichel. So she'er b'ksus, which is monetary, you can say to your the intended wife, I'm not going to give you this. Now maybe she has it independently, whatever the reason, he doesn't want to give it to her, and she can be meichel. She's allowed to be meichel. But the chiddush is, even according to Rabbi Yehuda, who says you can be meichel, that's only on monetary matters. On non-monetary matters like oinoah, which is the relationship, the physical and the emotional relationship that a man has with his wife, that a wife cannot be meichel, and that a man can't exclude himself from. So that's Rabbi Yehuda's shita. Okay, Gemara wants to say that Rav, who says that you cannot give up oinoah, holds like Reb Meir, who says you can't give up shervik susvaina. In other words, it's shava b'shava, it's equal. And simply put, Shmuel, who says you can give up on oinoah, he holds like Rabbi Yehuda, at least on monetary matters, because it's money to money. Oinoah is money, and sharing kasus is money. So on monetary matters, they're alike. But of course, Rabbi Yehuda says that you can't give up on oinoah. Says the Gemara, this is where we were up to, that both Rav and Shmuel say we are not precluded from holding like the other Tana in the Mishnah. Meaning, Rav says Rabbi Yehuda can hold like me, and Shmuel says Rabbi Meir can hold like me, and they parse the differences as to why, in one case it is, and in one case it isn't. In other words, and the key consideration is whether it's a davar habola olam, which we've talked about many times in the past. If it's something that's ripe, that's here, you can address it. But something that isn't ripe, how do you address it? I am taking myself out of the parsha of onoah. What onoah? Who says there's onoah here? Who says there was fraud? You just want to preclude yourself from fraud if there is fraud. That's not the same as saying, I'm not responsible to give my wife monetary comfort or monetary consideration, which is a bola olam, because he's about to marry her. If he marries her, he has to give her monetary consideration. And he's saying, I'm not going to give it to you. There we can parse and say, it's a bola olam. It's already here in front of us. The wife can say, I don't want it, or I give it up. But something that isn't even in the world yet. We don't know if there's going to be a fraud in this particular sale. Nobody knows. Not until we go out and sell it do we know whether or not fraud was committed. So that's kind of the way the Gemara wants to parse the differences and say that Rav can hold like Rav Yehuda and Shmuel can hold like the Tanna Kama. Okay, that's a brief summary of where we are. Now on Daf Nun Aleph Amud Beis, we're going to continue. I think we just touched on this last week. We'll just say it over and go from there. The Gemara says Meisvei, and the Gemara is going to ask a kasha on Rav. So let's see where we have Meisvei. It's the first word on the line of about 7 or 8 lines down from the top of Nun Aleph Amud Beis. The Gemara says Meisvei. I'm going to ask a kasha. What's the kasha? Okay, so we have a circumstance where in other words, you can hire someone to be your shaliach to sell something. There's a lot of different ways to do it. So the Gemara says as follows: Hanoisei v'hanoisei ba'amona. Someone who does his business on amona. Amona basically is amuna. It's trust. In other words, he says to a shaliach, "I'm going to pay you a flat fee. You go ahead and sell my goods for the best price you can." In other words, I'm not going to charge you if you sell it below what the market should be, but you can't have a taina on me if you sell it for far more than the market and say that I owe you money because I know 1/6 you exceeded. In other words, the shliach goes out, something should be $100, he sells it for 80. The seller has no taina on it. Can't have a taina, you undersold. But if he comes back and it sells at 120, that's way more than a 6. He can't come to the seller and say, you owe me money because I sold it at a great profit. Now, mind you, he's getting paid with a flat fee, whatever that fee is, 5%, 8%, 10%, whatever fee they agree upon, he trusts the fellow. That's one situation in the Brisa. The second situation is, Al Menashe ein lecho alai no. He says specifically to the shaliach, there is no ono here. I'm not going to fault you. You're not going to fault me. So notice one of them is where he sells them by a munah and the guy sells it for whatever he sells it. The second case where he says verbally, that you want to have an no. In both those cases, say the Brisa, ein lo olav ano. There is no ono. There's no ono in the case of the shliach, and there's no ono in the case of a person who says in so many words, there's no fraud in our transaction. Okay, so that's the Brisa. Now, so now we're going to go weiter. So now the Rav, according to Rav, who says, Anodom afila Rabbi Yehuda, Rav who is machmir, right? Rav says that when you say oino, ein lecho oino, you can't give it up. He's going to say, even Rabbi Yehuda, who is meiko in the case of the ksuba, that we hold the like. What does that mean? We hold the like. In other words, Rav is going to be lenient. L'chayra, we don't know. Rav may be lenient because he holds like Rabbi Yehuda. Frek the Gemara, hi mani. According to Rav, who is the Tana of the Mishnah? Is it Rab Meir or is it Rabbi Yehuda? Because Rav himself says that you cannot wipe out ono by simply saying ein lecho ono. This Brisa says you can. The second example of the Brisa was al menashe ein lecho ono. If a person says on the condition that I have no ono, then he gives it up. But that's not what Rav says. But on the other hand, Rav says that I hold like Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yehuda is mekel. So the question is, in Rav himself, what's his position vis-a-vis the Mishnah? Is the Mishnah Rab Meir or is the Mishnah Rabbi Yehuda? Because we're getting conflicting signals from Rav as to whether or not there is or is not oino. That's the Gemara's question. It's a little bit complicated. How do we understand the Mishnah according to Rav if he says on the one hand, you can't have oino, and the other hand, he holds like Rabbi Yehuda, who is mekel in monetary matters. So that's the Gemara's kasha here. Okay, that's the Gemara's kasha. If Rav holds, if Rav says that I can hold like Rabbi Yehuda and Rab Meir, then the question is, who is the Tana of our Mishnah? Is it Rab Meir, who is machmer like Rav, or is it Rabbi Yehuda, who is mekel but also holds like Rav in certain circumstances? So that's the Gemara's kasha. All right. So now we're going to give two answers to this kasha. to try to understand who Rav holds like, whether it's like Rabbi Meir or Rabbi Yehuda. The first answer, this answer really, it's an answer, non-answer. Why? Amar Abaye, Machvarte Rav Amar Rabbi Meir, Shmuel Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Because of this question and the complexity that it raises, we're going to go back to our original statement, which is what? Rav holds like Rabbi Meir, and Shmuel holds like Rabbi Yehuda, and there's no cross agreement. In other words, we're trying to say that Rabbi Yehuda and Rav can really coexist. Says Abaye, based on the kasha, based on this brisa, they can't coexist. Because the brisa says in no uncertain terms that if you say Al Menashe Ein L'cho no, then there's no no. Then you haven't committed fraud. So how do you reconcile that? So Abaye, he's a purist, so to speak. He says we can't find Rabbi Yehuda like Rav and Rabbi Meir like Shmuel. No, it doesn't work. Got to go back to our original theory that the Machlokes Ameroim is exactly patterned on the Machlokes Tanoim. Rav holds like Rabbi Meir, and Shmuel holds like Rabbi Yehuda. So basically, for purposes of our discussion, he's saying you got to go with the simple truth that there is no way that Rav can hold like Rabbi Yehuda. Can't happen. So therefore, if that's the case, then the Tana of our Mishnah, if you go according to Rabbi Meir, the Tana of Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda. Because Rabbi Yehuda says what? That you're makel on monetary matters. And this Mishnah's brisa says, that on monetary matters having to do with oino, you can give up, you can wipe it out. So that's Rabbi Yehuda. That really is Rabbi Yehuda. So according to Abaye, Rav has to say that the Mishnah holds like Rabbi Yehuda, not like Rav Meir. That's one interpretation. The second interpretation, which really is, that gets us going here, much more complicated, Rava Omar. Rava says, Loi kasha, it's not a complicated question. Why? Because we're going to bifurcate the Mishnah and this brisa. In other words, we're going to say the Mishnah says what the Mishnah says, and this brisa, which seems to lean in a different direction, is talking about something totally different. And again, very consistent with how the Gemara interprets, is to show that you can learn pshat one way and the other way, and they're not a stira because they're talking about two separate things. What are the two separate things? Lo kasha. Kan b'stam, kan b'mefurish. So this is very interesting. When you have an overcharge where we don't know, in other words, no one said anything. He went to the market, he sold it. It turns out that he sold it for more than a sixth or less than a sixth, depending which way you go. Okay, that could be a normal case of oino. That's oino. But so that's the Mishnah. So the Mishnah says what it says, and in the case of oino, it says that you're chayiv. You're definitely chayiv. In other words, you have to pay the shtus. Kan b'mefarish, but the brisa where it says beferish ein l'cho no, that's speaking about a different situation. There, he said specifically, "I am overcharging you. Don't make any mistake. I'm going to overcharge you, but we're not going to allow a no to get in the way." So that's a whole different story. If a guy comes to you and says, "You know what? This is $100 on the marketplace. I'm charging you $150. Take it or leave it." $150. That's way over shtus. That's my position. Now he has a choice. He can say no or he can say yes. Says the Gemara here that if he says yes, that's like the wife who says, "I don't want Shevik Sus. I know what it is, and I give it up because I want that particular chayfetz. I want that object. I'm willing to pay $150. So when you speak out and you say b'mafurish specifically, I am overcharging you or undercharged, depending on what the situation is. If you say it, all bets are off. You can't then later come and say, oh, you frauded me. How did I fraud you? I told you up front, I'm charging you $150 for an item that in the marketplace is clearly 100. Says the Gemara that in that particular case, if a person says, Ein li ono, because I'm overcharging you and you should know it, that is 100% no ono. But where ono creeps up in a situation where I come to you and I want to sell you an item, and it turns out later that I overcharged you, but we didn't discuss it. I didn't say it to you, you didn't expect it, and it turns out and say, wait a minute, you overcharged me tremendously. I want a refund. There, shtus applies because it's stam, it's unspoken. So now, with that distinction, let's go. So the Tanya, we learned in a brisa. What does the brisa say? When does when do we say?
But excuse me, Rabbi. How can you have the situation where somebody intentionally overcharges, even though he announces it, and the buyer says fine? That's still overcharged. How do you?
Except that, so what we're saying that becomes an exception in the marketplace. Two people can conclude a deal that for them is outside of the norm. I want this chayfetz. I need it. I want it. You will sell it to me, but only on one condition, that you're charging me 150. Otherwise, I got to go searching for that chayfetz, and who knows if I'll ever find it. So sometimes, as a loss leader, I mean, we know this in business. As a loss leader, you say, fine, I'll overpay. I'll make it up somewhere else. So in your mind, it's not even an overcharge because it's the cost of doing business. Says the Gemara that the cost of doing business is legitimate in halacha. In other words, it's not you're in a box and if you overcharge no matter what, you're chayiv. If two people conclude a deal, and we understand this is the normal mekach memker. If two people conclude a deal and make conditions that aren't the norm out there for everybody else, why would we preclude them when Reuven says to Shimon, I'm going to charge you 150, and Shimon says, well, I don't like it, but I have no choice because I want this chayfetz. I will willingly pay 150. So, Jay, the point is that he's masking to it for reasons of his own. And we saw that the other week. Remember, we said when a person was a broker and he has an opportunity to flip something, even if it's going to be a loss, he's willing to do it because his next purchase is a windfall win. So he's willing to overpay or underpay, as the case may be, and it's clearly ono, but he's willing to do it because the next deal that stands around the corner is going to profit him 3 times as much. So the Torah is not standing in the way of people doing business. There is a framework for halacha that a person shouldn't be suckered in, or a person shouldn't foolishly do something that he shouldn't be doing. But when you have someone who knows what he's doing, and he says, I'm masking. I mean, you've done that, I'm sure. You've bought or sold things that you really wanted, and you say, look, I got it. I'm in the marketplace. I got to buy this because that's the only thing I can get, and I need this. Then the Torah doesn't preclude and say that there should be fraud in that situation. Of course, there's no fraud. So, in other words, when it's spoken out and the parties can come to terms, then even though it's midoraisa, now mind you, oino is midoraisa.
That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah,
but I mean, how can they throw it away, and how can they bypass it by saying I agree to whatever I want?
I think the interpretation is that for these two people in this instance, it's not oino because the facts on the ground for them are not the facts that would be for you and somebody else or me and a third person, where in the marketplace there is a number for this and nothing else. So
next guy who wants to buy this used computer, whatever, he's in a situation where he doesn't want to agree to overcharge, and therefore you have the violation in that case. In case the seller says, I want 150.
Right. So when there's so that's the point, Jay. When there's no meeting of the minds, between two people as to what is an appropriate price, then the Torah says that is oino. But when two people come together and they establish a price, even if it's different than the market price, but the two of them have agreed on a price that this is the right price at this point in time, supply and demand, or whatever.
Whatever. Yeah.
Right. So in other words, the Torah is carving out that exception to allow for mekach and memker. Otherwise, you will stifle business entirely because people will be sort of locked into a little box, and that's the Torah. No, okay, Michael. So that's the point. Yeah, Michael. Michael, yeah.
You're muted.
I didn't raise my hand.
Oh, no. I'm sorry, David.
I did,
I'm
Rabbi.
sorry. I didn't mean Michael. I meant David. Go ahead.
Oh, you learned from my sister, huh?
Yeah, right. Exactly. By the way, David's name is also Michael, just for the record.
I just
Okay,
told
David.
that to Michael yesterday. Why is this then different than ribbis? Because
Why is it different than ribbis?
yeah, because there you can't pay more for interest. Why here they make an exception on a lending of money that they don't make the exception? They're both for business, exactly what you were just saying to Jay about why you can make the exception if two people agree. If I agree to pay you more money, call it interest, call it more money, however you want to word it. You can't do it though.
That's a very good question, because we're going to talk about ribbis in this situation in just a little bit. A little bit different than what you're asking, but you're asking a very good question, because l'chayra, this should be ribbis. L'chayra, it should be ribbis, because when you look at it objectively, it's sort of taking advantage is what it is. That the ribbis portion isn't identical to what ribbis is, but you're taking advantage, and basically ribbis means taking advantage. So I'll grant you that, and I'll tell you that it's not ribbis, because in ribbis, typically you're not making an exchange, sort of like a sale, a complete exchange. In ribbis, you're dependent on the other fellow to continue in the deal, meaning he's lending you money, because it's a lending situation, not a purchasing situation. So when one person seems to have the upper hand to the other one in a loan, he can't double down and take interest, because that is being oppressive to the other fellow. And that's the chilek, David, is that when two people are on equal footing, there's nothing to say that if I have a chayfetz and you want it, that I have to sell it to you. I can sell it to Menashe. I can sell it to someone totally different. It's not the same, because I have options. And if you can't get it from me, you would have to get it from somebody else. So because it's a sale circumstance where we're both on even footing, I have something you want, and you have something that you're willing to sell to me. Therefore, in a straightforward fashion, we are saying you can't have ribbis, because it's not asymmetrical as it would be in a loan. That's the sort of the short answer. But your question is apropos, and we're going to reach it hopefully today, and then ask it again, and then we're going to revisit it just again to ask the same question. So I don't want to say more other than it's not quite the same when you're lending someone money and he can use the money, or when you're doing a finite transaction where I'm buying, you're selling, and then we part and we have no further relationship. There, ribbis is not really sort of on the table.
So why not call this situation, an auction situation, not a regular sale? Two people agree to have an auction. There's only one person who's going to bid, and he bids way over the market price.
In a sense, you're right, Jay. I mean,
But it should be called an auction. It shouldn't be called.
No, it's not an auction, but you're hitting it. You're right. In other words, why is an auction different? Because an auction is not the same as Right. So we have to extrapolate that in this particular situation. Yes, it's like an auction, because these two people are sort of pulling back from the marketplace, and they're not saying we are like everybody else on the marketplace, and therefore, if I overcharge you, it's ribbis. This is like an auction, so to speak, and therefore I ask my price. And just like an auctioneer doesn't have to, I mean, you sell it for what you sell it, right? You don't necessarily have to agree to a lower price if you don't want to sell it. The same here. This is a unique situation, and therefore, for all intents and purposes, we're not in the normal mekach memker, and therefore, Oinah doesn't apply. You can
have to take it out of the regular
yeah, but I think
call
that's
it something
essentially,
else.
yeah, I think that's essentially what we're trying to say is that we're taking it out of the regular mekach and memker commerce between buyers and sellers in the marketplace, and it's miyuchad between you and me, just like an auction is you and me. It's miyuchad between you and me. But why? Because he says it out there. You're not going to get this for less than 150. I don't care what the market says. I'm charging 150. He's allowed to do
That's
that.
his reserve price.
Reserve price. Yeah, exactly.
So it really takes it out of, and it doesn't violate the fact that either one of them are dismissing the regular Torah arrangement.
That's right. So the Torah is telling us we're going to carve out an exception in this situation so that it's not like every other situation where Ono applies. Exactly right. Yeah. Michael?
Rabbi, is this the halacha? Because we just started this discussion. We haven't heard the counter. Is this the halacha?
Yes.
So it seems like it's against public interest because you're establishing a different ground for pricing. So essentially, what you're going to do is you're going to have people who have more wherewithal to establish a higher regular price for these goods, which may be the higher quality of those goods,
right,
to be offline. Because what you're saying is that Ona is only in a situation where there's no agreement that precedes it, which it could have started to say right away. It could have said, look, unless you have and I know you're going to say, well, they weren't that sophisticated in those times, but they were sophisticated enough to carve out to make money. So if they could say, okay, we're going to deal in this, and I'm only dealing at this top of the market. So I'm segmenting the market, and there will be others with me, and we're going to set the price at this, which is not the same as the regular price in the marketplace. So in essence, while it conforms with halacha, essentially it will ultimately take the price to a different level because you have different negotiations outside of it. So it seems like it's working against the halachic interest of the dayanim who try to set a market that people can play fairly.
But you're right. But let me just point out that the whole point of Oinah and Shtus is essentially to protect the uninitiated. It's to protect the public who normally deal in items and don't know. So not to get duped, they don't know if they're underpaying or in the case if it's an overpay. So in other words, the framework that the Bezdin or the halacha puts in is really for the hamonam. It's for the large majority of people. But there are circumstances
come out that way.
But there are circumstances where two merchants understand the market, they understand what everything goes for, and a person comes out and says, I just want you to know that this is not regular, whether it is or it isn't. In other words, no one's examined his merchandise, but it could be the same as everybody else's merchandise, but he's coming out and says, this merchandise, remember, in a private sale, right? This is commercial. In a private sale, we said a few weeks ago that a private person can sell whatever he wants because it's chaviv to him. And if he thinks that this item should be selling for twice the marketplace because he is not a professional seller, the Gemara says 100% you're allowed to do it. This fellow is a professional seller, but he is saying in no uncertain terms, don't consider me for this particular item. Don't consider to me to be a professional seller like the guy in the next stall or in the next booth. You go to Machane Yehuda and you buy, and you see 6 vendors, one after the other, selling the exact same item. But you look at the prices, they should be alike, because if you go to Machane Yehuda and one guy's selling more than the other, you're not going to pay it. So it's a very competitive situation, but there's enough business to go around that everybody can sell at that price. But you go down Machane Yehuda and one guy's selling it for 10 shkolim and the other guy's selling it for 15, the other guy's selling it for 17. You're going to say, what's going on here? Why should I pay 17 when this guy's selling it for 10? So clearly in the marketplace, these inyanim of honor come into play. But if the guy's standing there and is telling you very, very clearly, don't compare mine to him. They look alike, but they're not alike. And he tells you why they're not alike. And then you have a choice to say, I buy into what you're saying, or I don't buy into saying. What the Torah is saying is, we're not going to circumscribe you from making a living and selling if you're upfront and you make a distinction and you say, my item is not your item. That's why I can sell for 17 shkolim and you only sell for 10, and there's no oh no. So Michael, what you have to understand is that Chazal, in doing this, they want to protect the uninitiated, but not thwart normal mekach and memker, because there are better and there are worse. It may not be apparent to the naked eye when I look at it that your item is so much better than the next guy, but he's telling you up front it is. I'll show you why it is, and then you decide, buy by me, buy by him. So you have to really understand the nuance here, that you can't have one size fit all. But if you don't say, and you're out there trying to dupe the guy by saying mine is 17, and maybe you'll walk into Machane Yehuda on my side and not see the next guy and pay me 17 and turn around and go home, and then you realize if I take it another 10 steps, I could have gotten the same thing for 10. That's what the Gemara, that's what we're protecting you from.
Rabbi, you've bifurcated the market, and what you're saying is, just in your example of Machane Yehuda, is the fact that somebody walks down there. They can't allege that somebody who's charging, in your example, 10 versus 17, that the one who's 17 is engaging in Ona, because his distinction is the quality of product. So what by virtue of announcing that and putting it out there, you're eliminating the challenge, because
and that's what the Gemara means by mefurish, that you're being mefurish. Mine is much better. You can't compare it to what he's selling.
So you're segmenting the market as to quality and price, and
correct.
Therefore it's only within those segments that
correct.
you
absolutely
can
absolutely
designate Ona. And so from a public policy interest, you're saying all bets are off. But somebody who's coming into the market then as a buyer needs to be sophisticated if they're buying commercially.
Well, again, the question is, how much can Chazal protect you from yourself? I mean, you have to have some awareness, and so we're going to protect you as much as we can. But if you are totally unaware and don't want to educate yourself and don't want to become aware that the market for this item is really 10, not 17, then again, that's where there's got to be some line of demarcation between a buyer and a seller, where the seller does everything to express the differences and the buyer is oblivious and then comes back and said, you cheated me. And the guy said, how did I cheat you? I was as obvious and open as I possibly could be. I announced it. I said, my item is my item. And if you want to buy something of lesser quality, then you go over there. So the whole question of Ona, what it boils down to is, according to what Rava is telling us, it's a question of stam or mefurish. Stam, you can't get away with it, because that is a hidden item, and we have to protect the consumer or the seller, from fraud up or down. But mefurish, something that is mefurish, it's out there. How much more can we protect the public? It's mefurish. Yeah,
One
Menashe.
last
So-
point, because I know
oh,
Menashe
okay.
wants to get in.
Sorry, go ahead.
We're turning this upside down. We should be learning it in the reverse. We should be learning that the market is segmented and that, in those situations, you made a distinction. And then when we get down to the point that it's stam, as you say, then we have that, because we've had all this buildup, and then we think we know the law, and the law is really not what we think it is at the end of the day. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Menashe.
That's all right. So let me throw out a different slight variation. Well, first of all, if the guy is saying mine is better, that's why it's more, so ignore the other price, mine's really worth more, then there isn't any ona, because, or it's a question of whether the quality is what he says.
Right.
But if he's correct, that's just not ona. He's selling a different product effectively. But let me give you a different example. Let's say it's Erev Rosh Hashanah. Everybody's selling apples for 10 shekels a bag in Machane Yehuda. One guy is selling for 15 a bag, and he's right up front. And they say, well, when somebody's curious, everybody's 10. I'm going to grab that guy's apples or that or that or that. You're 10, 15. Why should I pay more? He says, well, it's the same thing. I'm charging more. I'm making more profit. This is my busy day, and take it or leave it. An hour before Yontif, everybody else is sold out. He's sitting there with his 15 shekel bags of apples, and he starts selling them because the last minute people, they don't have a choice. If he still is he, and it's clear that everybody else during the day was selling them at 10. So this really is ona in a sense, and yet he's the last guy standing. Could anybody argue and say, you can't sell it for more than 12, a sixth over, because it's a new market.
That's the question. Is this now a new market, or is it the same product? And because he was there all day.
The 10 shekels don't exist anymore. This is a new market with a new price.
So I can see that. I'm just saying. I'm bringing up this as a
No, these are very good questions. But understand that this is really the machlokes between Abaya and Rava. According to Abaya, Menashe, the fellow who is now selling it for 15 because everybody else is sold out, and you're forcing someone to spend more money, and it's ona in the purest sense. It's ona because it's overpriced. According to Abaya, that would be ona. In other words, you are overcharging because the entire marketplace for that apple, not qualitatively, it's the same apple, and you're charging more than a shtus.
It's the same apple that he paid the farmer, the same as the 10 shekel guys paid the farmer, etc. The only difference is the time.
So then, in the purest sense, according to Abaya, the way he interprets the machlokes, absolutely it's ona. Of course, it's ona because you've taken advantage of the marketplace, and therefore it's more than a shtus. Rava is the one who is bringing in this new concept that the machlokes between Rav and Shmuel on the one hand, and even Rav Meir and Yehuda, who you want to extrapolate into this machlokes, there's a new dynamic, and that's called mefurish. So according to Rava, mefurish exonerates you from oina because you stood there on the hide's corner, on the speaker's corner, and you kept announcing, mine is this, mine is this. You don't have to buy by me. Maybe now you do because everybody else is out of apples. But I've said all along that this is my price, and take it or leave it. I'm willing to go home with my apples if someone doesn't pay my price. And for all we know, his expenses bringing the apple to market justifies his price.
No, but my hypothesis is a situation where his expenses were the same. Now he might be willing to do this because apples will keep for a few days. So he knows worst case he'll sell them for 10 on the day after Rosh Hashanah.
On the day after Rosh Hashanah, exactly. So this is what Rava is machadish to us, is that I'm going to explain this whole Gemara by saying that there is the difference between stam and mefurish. And that's a new dynamic. And here we're having this intellectual discussion about whether just because he's mefurish, does that give him the right to sell it at a higher price? And Rava says, yes, as long as he's not deceptive. here it's the deception that Chazal, that they are protecting everybody from. You know what? Surreptitiously, I'm going to sell it for more. You're not going to know, and therefore I'll make a couple more shekalim. But where he's not being surreptitious, where he's being upfront, and there, Mekach Memker requires, and we've seen before, by the way, in different situations where public policy trumps a particular situation, because if you don't allow people to in the marketplace to express themselves, you're going to chill the marketplace, and therefore there won't be interaction between buyers and sellers, lenders and borrowers, whatever. So Chazal, in terms of thinking about this, they have to look at the larger picture, not just the buyer and the seller, but is this good for the marketplace? Says Rava, of course it's good for the marketplace, because there probably always will be someone who will be able to sell it to him at a lower price. But if someone says, I won't, then you go to the next guy. Now we're going into maybe a different arena of where there is a scarcity in the marketplace and a person should not take advantage of his friend. But that's a different Indian. That's not the Indian here, where a person is taking advantage because he's cornered the market. Here, we know there's a market at 10 shkalim, because that's the proof. The proof is that if people are selling it at 10, only you are selling it at 15. But if you say I'm selling it at 15 and that's my price, then according to Rava, you're allowed to do it. According to Rava, that's a valid form of entrepreneurship, and there is no onah when you're mafurish. Again,
according to Rava, he's taking a risk. He doesn't know.
Yeah,
there'll be more buyers.
If there'll be more buyers, right? Exactly.
And the others have sold out.
Exactly.
That's his strategy of business. He says, "I'll take my chances, but if I get 50% of the customers, I would have still made
more money." Right. Yeah. I use the basketball analogy to just how many shots for a 2-pointer can you make vis-a-vis a shot for a 3-pointer? You can miss more 3-pointers and still make more points than shooting a 2-pointer. Right. So, but that's your balance. That's what you have to determine.
You take that risk
in Mekach HaMemker. Do I want to go for kamus or echos? Do I want to go for quantity or quality? And sometimes for quality, you sell less and you make more. I mean, again, this is business. We're not talking about business 101. We're having a course in business 101. Al Pi HaTorah, how a person should go about doing his business. The Gemara has certain key directives, and then there's some leeway. According to Rava, according to Baya, it's strictly speaking, no. According to Rava, we have a leeway when someone wants to buck the marketplace and be mafurish that we're not going to chill him. And you're right, Jay. He'll either win or he'll lose. He doesn't know going in if he's going to make as much money or less or more. He may come back and say, I was a fool. I should have just sold it like everybody else. I would have made more money.
Well, Rabbi, why doesn't one person just come in, buy all up the other Apple stands for 10 cents a piece, and then put it on the market for 15 cents?
So halachically, that's not permitted, because that's a question of deceiving the marketplace. It's a whole, that's not in our Indian, but that is a question that comes up halachically. Can you do that? Can you buy up the marketplace and then charge what you will and get away with
business.
it? So, no, yeah.
But that's business.
Yeah, but
you're not really.
But under it's business, but under the Torah, it's not ethical business. In other words, it's not something that the Torah says is permissible, because then the more powerful will take advantage of all the weaker. If some guy has all the money to be able to buy it, he'll take advantage and hurt everybody else. That's where the Chazal come in and say, no, we have to have a certain appropriateness in the marketplace. And again, as much as they were sitting and learning, they were not totally in the book to not understand what business is like. You saw many of the Tanoim and Amoraim were business people. They had to buy and sell. We learned that Rabbi Yehuda was a winemaker, and Rabbi Yochanan was a sandler. And so, in other words, there is a balance between a Torah and practical commerce. And here, this is one example in Bava Metzia. It's in other places too, but we see here how one should treat one in commerce. In fact, the next parak after this is called Ezeo Neshech. It's totally about ribis. It's totally about how one comports himself in selling. As to whether or not you can sell with ribis. We've talked about it, but there's an actual parak that goes into it in all detail, which we'll get to, Mitzvah Shem. Yeah, okay.
Rabbi, you're not really gouging the people, because think of it this way: you have 10 people selling apples at 10 cents a piece. They all want to sell their product. The chances of people to go and buy all their products is very limited. Let's say as a merchant, I'm selling mine, and I tell everybody up front, mine are 15 cents a piece. That's what my price is. Now, wouldn't it be better for me, if I can, to buy everybody up? They get their 10 cents a piece. They're happy. That's what they want. That's their goal to make, so that they can sustain themselves for whatever period of time. Now, I'm selling it at 15. Now look, you have the opportunity to buy it for 10. If you're not doing it and you're just going to hang around and wait, maybe thinking that because this guy has all these apples, it's going to go spoiled, I'll wait until the last minute and then I'm going to offer him 5 cents a piece.
Right.
So this way, I'm going to do it. I'm going to give you 15 cents because you're refusing. You want to play the same game everybody else is playing. You're going to wait till it goes down. When opportunity knocks, you have to take it. So if you don't take it at 10, now you're getting it at 15. If I don't sell it at 15 today, I'll wait until Sunday and sell it for 10.
But how do you know you will have a market then for 10?
I don't.
You don't. So that this is why the Chazal say that that's why the whole Indian of Shtus comes about, is because if there is a norm, and that curve says you can make a nice profit by selling it for 10, and everybody does it, then you shouldn't be chutz medivrei chachamim. You shouldn't be outside of what the rabbis are saying is the norm. You want to go beyond the norm, then we're going to penalize you by saying that if you make more than a sixth, then we're going to exclude you or cancel the deal, whatever the case may be, or for an exact six you have to repay it. This is exactly what the rabbis are saying. We want to protect the public from the unscrupulous guy who's thinking, and I'm not saying you're unscrupulous, but you're posing a position where some guy's going to say, I'm going to be smarter than the marketplace. I will do something different than everybody else. And at the end of the day, I'll walk out with more money.
Because that's not really correct, because I'm a businessman. I'm out for business. I'm not out to gouge people. I just want to move a product. If it's not sold, it's going to spoil. So you ask me, well, what am I going to do if I can't sell it for 10 cents the next day? Well, I'll take all the apples, I'll make it into apple juice. Then I'll sell it as a juice. So I'm not going to lose my product.
Okay, again, I mean, now we're getting into a lot of different discussions, and it's fair to ask that question, but I think if you go back to the initial question, and that is apples to apples, so to speak, not apples to juice or apples to something else. If you are in Machne Yehuda and there's 10 stalls and everybody's selling it for 10 shekel for the bag and making a profit, that Chazal say, that's the norm. That's what we want. We want everybody to be uniform. Everybody should make some money, and a buyer shouldn't be taken advantage of. And this way, commerce goes on. Says,
I'm not taking any from their profit. They want 10 cents. I'm giving it to them. They're doing better now because I'm buying them all than they would. Hey, I don't know if I'm going to sell them all today. This way, they're selling their whole product.
Right. So, again, the fellow who buys it all up to corner the market.
You're not hurting the other vendors. They're happy.
That's right.
But you're hurting.
They're happy. I'm not hurting.
But you're
anybody.
hurting the ordinary customer.
Ordinary person, right.
Well,
right,
I'm not really hurting them. It's their fault because if they bought it when they should have.
But you know,
because you were there at six in the morning buying it all up, and the other people wandering at noon figuring they're going to see the usual selection of apples.
Right. So the Chazal really is trying to protect the weakest of the batch by saying that someone shouldn't be taken advantage of, maybe in a circumstance like you're posing, David, where he's not going to have the opportunity to buy. Now, again, supply and demand in the marketplace is a component of halacha as well, so that if all the apples have been consumed and there aren't more apples, and then someone comes out and says, I'm selling it for this price, okay, there will be a question whether or not he's gouging the market. We have to understand what the market is, or whether or not there's, like someone said before, there's a new norm. I think, Jay, you said, there's a new norm. There's a new, yesterday's price is not today's price. Yesterday, the market was 10 shekel for a thing. And then like any commerce, right? Supply and demand. Next day, the price could be 12 shekel or less if there's more. So again, I think we have to understand this in the context of what's fair to the Hamon Am, not to the one guy who has the ability maybe to corner the market or to buy it up and to say, I'm buying everything at 10 and everybody's going to make their money. Now there's no more apples left for everybody else. And now I can take advantage. There, Chazal tell us, if you do that with intention to gouge, you're over a lav. You're over a lav if you do that. But in the normal course, where there's a finite number of apples, you can't, for Rosh Hashanah, you can't grow more before Rosh Hashanah than what you have. Now you have a circumstance where the question then becomes, if I'm the only apple vendor around and everybody else is sold out, can I sell it? Can I still make the same profit at 10 shekalim? Or am I allowed to sell it at 12 shekalim because now that's a fair price in the market? But we're not going to address that now, because that's a real different question than what we're talking about in terms of a no. But the bottom line, and why this is creating such controversy, is because Rava has introduced a carve out to the normal buying and selling in the marketplace by telling us that if you're mafurish, if you're explicit, you're not hiding anything, and you're coming out in the marketplace and saying, I am selling for this particular price, then you're allowed to sell it. And let's hold off now, because I just want to, let's learn the rest of this particular, of the language of the sugya, just to understand what we're saying. So we're saying that the Tanya, we learned in the Brisa, when do we say that there is price fraud when you've manipulated, is bestam, okay? Where you went out into the marketplace and you said, I'm charging 12 shekalim. You didn't tell anybody, and he's unaware and he doesn't know, or 15 shekalim, let's say, and he doesn't know that down the street everybody's selling it at 10. He can come back later saying I was overcharged, right? Or vice versa. Aval the mefurish, but when the seller says, what does he say? This is the language of the Brisa. The seller says to the buyer, what does he say? He says them in so many words. This item that I'm selling you for 200, let's say, zuzim or shkalim, I'm not kidding you. I know it's worth 100, but I'm selling it to you for 200. So, almanas she'ein lecho alaya no. But don't buy it from me unless you agree that we're waiving price fraud as an issue. How much more? The Chazal won't penalize him for that. He may be an idiot, or he may be overestimating the market and thinks, I'll sell this all day long. You know what? You'll be left holding the bag because no one's going to buy from you. But Chazal give him the opportunity to do that. But if he doesn't specify, he says, this is the nicest apple, I'm selling it for 200 shekalim. The guy says, yeah, it's a nice apple, I'm going to buy it for 200 shekalim. And then it turns out that it was really only 100 shekalim. That's oino. That's a classic case of oino, and you can't do it. But or flip side, the buyer says to the seller, the item that I'm buying you for 100 b'mana, for a mana, I know it's worth twice as much, but that's all I'm going to pay you. I'm not paying you more. Now the seller says, wait a minute, I got a buyer in hand. I can make a profit at the lower number. I really want the higher number. What should I do? But the buyer says, but you're going to sell it to me, and then you can't come back and say that I undercut you and you should make more money. Then ain't loyal love, I know. So in other words, this brisa is telling us chapter and verse how the deal goes down, either from the seller side or from the buyer side, and is telling us that when you're out there and you're making it as clear as day that my deal is different than everybody else's deal, but you have to accede to my deal if you're going to buy by me, otherwise don't come to me. Then at the end of the day, I know everybody has a little bit of an issue here, but he's either foolish or smart, right? I mean, either he's uncannily aware that he can do this, or he's foolish because he's not going to get any buyers. Chazal say that you can do. We're not going to constrain you from doing something according to Rava. We're not going to constrain you if you're b'mefurish and you come out and say in so many words, this is my deal. Go ahead, Michael.
Rabbi, I just want to clarify something, and that is that if I say that my product is superior and I charge a higher price and I say, I make that specification, I'm charging this because, mine are organic versus yours that are not organic, as an example.
Yeah.
But it turns out that that's a false statement. That reality is that the differentiation that he represents, and so he's overcharging. That's not ona, but it is fraud.
Well, I mean, it's fraud, but not legal fraud. In other words, I know. In other words, it's fraud because he's saying something not truthful, right? That's what you're saying.
Right.
He's
I'm saying that,
truthful.
that's so if he was, the distinction is because if he was making that difference and it was really true, then he could charge that price. But if he was saying that it was something that it wasn't, that is true fraud. And that's not where that is where ona separates from that kind of a situation.
Right. But Michael, what compels someone to announce on the marketplace the reason why he is charging more money? What compels anybody to say my fruit
What
is better?
compels is if all my to your example, if all my competitors are charging less, and most of my buyers are pretty sophisticated, then I need to make a differentiation to buttress why I'm charging more than less.
So it's no, I hear what you're saying, but it seems to me that what you're feeling compelled to say is that when someone is deviating from the marketplace, he has to have a real excuse. Otherwise, we treat him as a fraud. And Rava
No,
is saying,
no. I think
isn't that what you're saying? Isn't that what you're asking?
No, I'm saying if we talked about that the market segmented. So, there are reasons in the marketplace in Machane Yehuda why people would be charging 10, 15, 18 cents for their apples
Right.
in the examples we talked about. And so you have the option, and you can say commercially, this is my price and this is what I'm charging. But if the basis that he's saying that mine's 18 cents as justification is not true for whatever reason, and there is a distinction with a difference that really would be there, it's not a question of ona at this point because he has misrepresented what he's selling. But you said before and that we can segment the market into, and that's why you would have different prices for the same commodity. So, which was really not the same commodity because there are quality distinctions. So I'm just trying to figure out that where does ona start and leave? So if he overcharges, in that case, it's not a case of ona, it's a case of misrepresentation of what the product he's selling is. And that's true fraud, and that's a different violation.
Right. Okay. So I can accept what you're saying, but I think for purposes of the Gemara, you may be overcomplicating it, because the Gemara is not telling us in any respect, and Rashi doesn't even address that there is a qualitative difference between items in the marketplace. That is, that doesn't even come into play. If it came into play, we would be talking about a whole different parsha. So there's no qualitative difference between different items. The machlokes here is, according to, let's say, in a buyer's interpretation of what is onah here, you cannot deviate from what is the normal price of the majority of sellers. And if you do, you've committed price fraud, or
Well, then
vice
what's the
versa from the other part.
justification in Machane Yehuda that you have, a variation of prices that you talk about for the same goods?
Right, because Chazal will assume that the market will correct itself, that between sellers and buyers, that a seller is not going to want to be the odd thumb in the hand, and everybody's buying off the fingers and not off the thumb because his price is different. That if a person can make a nice profit at X, then everybody will make that profit at X, and no one will be taken advantage of. The difference comes only in Rava's interpretation. Rava comes along and he announces to us that, wait a minute, it's not one size fits all. We have something in the marketplace called onah, protecting buyers and sellers from onah, but only when you buyer and you seller are in the marketplace and don't actually know what you should be selling it at. There are times when the seller doesn't know what he should be selling, and there are times when a buyer doesn't know at what price he should be buying. But you need the item, it's Erev Rosh Hashanah, so you go ahead and you buy the item. After Rosh Hashanah, Sheres Yemei Tshuva, you find out, I didn't really do my homework, I underpaid, I overpaid, whatever it is. That's the classic box of Oinah that we're talking about. Nothing else. No qualitative issues, no anything else. We're only talking about buyers and sellers and their awareness. Rava comes and he introduces to us that no, it's not just about awareness. You can be aware all day long and still there may not be oinah if someone comes along, a buyer or a seller. We just saw the Brisa told us in no uncertain terms. It can be a buyer, it can be a seller. I am going to pay $100 for one mana and not 2 manas, and that's it. And I know what I'm doing. And if you don't want to sell to me, then don't sell to me. But if you sell to me at a mana, don't come back later after Rosh Hashanah and say that you cheated me. It's oinah because it really was Mosayim. So in other words, that's only Rava who is introducing this. Whether or not, again,
But I asked you if this was the halacha, and you said yes.
It's the halacha because we paskin like that.
Well, but the point is that
in the Gemara, it was a machlokes between.
Into this.
Yeah, no, I understand, but again, oftentimes in the Gemara there are views that we don't necessarily look upon favorably, but there's a greater, Tana.
But in Nash's example, when it's before it's Erev Rosh Hashanah and he doubles the price Erev Rosh Hashanah where nobody else does, or double than what the norm is.
Michael, that's different. I'm telling you right up. We'll address that later elsewhere. That even Rava would say is against the halacha, is to corner the market, take advantage of the market, and say, this is my price, take it or leave it, when everybody else. In other words, you can say things when other people have options. I can say what I want, but you can go to the next guy. Once you can't go to the next guy because there's now a run on the market and I'm the only one and I want to take advantage, new set of halachas. New set of halachas, Michael. We don't have the same halacha because it's not the same circumstance as what we're talking about. We're talking about the common circumstance where the Gemara tells us there's buyers, hundreds of buyers and sellers on the market, and you have one unfortunate guy, a seller or buyer, doesn't know what he's doing, and he sells it, and later on he finds he make a terrible mistake. We are willing to help him correct his mistake. Innocent mistake, help him correct it. Once we start getting into people who know what they're doing, they're being too sharp. They I'm going to buy up the market and resell it, or blah blah blah, whatever. Now we're talking in a different parsha, and the halachas are different. So that's why I want to say, don't equate one with the other. We'll address your what we're discussing here in a different circumstance at a different time. We're really only talking about the big box, and in that box, there's a machlokes now between Abaye and Rava. So it happens to be that the halacha we hold like Rava, but that circumstance is one that is just unique to this case. I can go to someone else and buy. I don't have to buy by
You're
you.
saying that what Rava introduces is a really special case that happens very infrequently. Is that what you're saying?
I can't say infrequent or not. I can't say.
Because
It's just Rava is saying that. But again, I think it was Menashe or someone else said. I mean, there's risks to that. I mean, a guy comes in and you may have only one buyer, but maybe that one buyer will pay enough to make my business for the whole day, and I don't have to worry about selling it at a lower price because I have the one buyer who's willing to buy. Now, let me ask you a question. Oh no, I mean, again, qualitative, quantitative. We know this by Erev Sukkos, by Lulav and Esrog. A buyer wants to buy a very expensive Esrog, and everybody else is selling it for a different price. But again, now we're talking qualitative versus quantitative. But in the marketplace, you go Erev Sukkos, everybody is selling a sroigim of the more or less same quality for the same price, because otherwise you won't buy by me, and it's a mitzvah as mangrama. After Erev Sukkos, it's not worth anything. It's worth a lemon juice. It's not worth anything. So there again. But if a person says, my esrig I'm selling for 100 shekel, you can buy another, and you look at it and say, okay, it's nice, but why is it different than anybody else's? It's not that it's necessarily qualitatively different, better. It's just that I want to sell mine for that amount. Rava says, buyer beware, seller beware. You know what you're doing? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But if you don't come back and cry later on that I made a mistake. Give me a reprieve. There's no reprieve at that point in time. You already lost it.
well, it seems very
Yeah.
Arbitrary when Beis Din is going to step in or not step in.
Yeah, and according to yes, and according to Rava, there is a certain arbitrariness, but we will allow it. It's built into the system when two people stand on the sideline and say, you and I are going to make a transaction outside of what is the norm, and I'm willing to pay you. And Michael, there may be other reasons why he wants to pay him that. Maybe he wants to curry favor. Again, we're not getting into
Well, I know it's late, but I just want to make one point. If somebody comes in and stipulates, I'm selling it, just like you said, I'm selling at this price. I don't care what the market is. I'm selling at this price. If you want to buy from me, you're going to buy from me.
right.
Whether there's a shortage or a surplus or not. And
Right.
he puts his stake in the ground. We don't go after him because he said that's it, and there's no justification, no reason that has to be. And so you can start out like that, and there's no ona in that case.
Right.
That's what you're saying.
Yep. Exactly right. Exactly right. And
So
again,
that changes
Abaye doesn't hold that.
That
And
changes.
it's only up
me,
to
that
Rabbi Shita.
changes the
I think we're
dynamic.
talking about 6 or 7 different scenarios,
Yeah.
trying to get a common ruling in
Right.
that, because these are exceptions to the basic, most common scenario that we're talking about.
Yeah.
And so we have exception A, exception B.
Yeah,
Exception
I mean,
B.
the way Rava saw the marketplace, and again, we're not there to really appreciate this, but Rava looked at the marketplace and said, the Hamon Am is going to be protected, but there are individuals who have, for whatever reason, have a need to make a sale at a number, and it's, in other words, Rava is saying, we're not going to protect everybody for being foolish. Okay, not surreptitious, not being surreptitious. You can't be illegal, underhanded. But if you want to go ahead and charge something in the marketplace that is so different than the market, then halachically we can't stop you. We can't stop you al pi halacha. You're not allowed to be ridiculous. You're not allowed to be an idiot. There's no such thing as protecting you from not being, Okay,
Of course,
as
certainly.
long as you're not surreptitious, you're not cheating. Who are you cheating when you say I want 100 and everybody charges 50? Who are you cheating? And again, Michael, maybe that's really what you have to really think about is that everything being equal, no qualitative difference, no, everything else being equal, one person coming along and saying, I want to charge this in the marketplace, the halacha can't prevent him. And a buyer makes no difference. A buyer says one size fits all. And maybe that's the reason why the halacha is like Rava, is because Chazal understood that for the Hamon Am, it's not going to be a problem. But for miuchadim, for individuals in the marketplace, one doesn't really have an appreciation why, if it's not that much of a better product, I want to sell it for more, or I want to sell it for less. That we can't legislate that, says Rava. Therefore, I'm going to have an out for someone who announces, doesn't do it underhand, doesn't cheat anybody, buyer beware. And by the way, again, in his interpretation, the Torah says you can't do onah. This is not onah. And as Rava doesn't say, I'm circumventing the Torah, because the Torah says onah. But what the Torah means by onah is stam, unknown. But mefurish doesn't mean onah. So now Rava has given us a definition of onah different than what we understand up until now.
But you can't protect, like you said just now, you
You
can't
can't protect.
the buyer who's totally ignorant from getting into the marketplace and saying, oh my God, I went to this and it happened to be a higher one. It's the only person I picked and I could have gotten it for less. It's a buyer beware concept. So,
Right.
this is where we get into really gray areas here.
Yes, yes, and this is why, again, we're a couple thousand years late, but this is the machlokes at the time, because they were astute in understanding the marketplace, and therefore Rava says, I've got to make exceptions. I can't allow everything to be just one way and not allow for any exception. Now, was he wrong? I mean, Rava was Rava. He came along and he said, no, this is a novel concept, because until now we don't know of this distinction, but I'm making this distinction. And of course, Abaya argued on him, and other Amoraim argued on him, and some Amoraim said, you're right. But the fact of the matter is, when you overlay 21st century commerce among religious people, I mean, I'm talking about from people. So you overlay commerce today. What is the halacha in commerce today? If I go out into the marketplace and I want to sell something that I say is, I mean, you can explore my item and say, yeah, I like your item, even though it's more than whatever else is selling. And in my eyes, it's I'm willing to pay it, whether it's qualitatively better or not. But again, we would say that should be appropriate. I mean, it's common sense today that it's there has to be an equilibrium between buyer and seller, and if not, then the whole system goes awry. But there has to be someone who's a chacham who likes what it is and says, I'm going to take a chance. I like it. I get burned later, I may get burned, but I like it, and therefore I'm willing to pay it. And we can't thwart him by saying, you can't do this because everybody else is paying half the amount that you're paying. Again, we gotta wrap our heads around. So let's stop here, and let me just give you a hint that the question that David asked about ribis will be our next. I thought we would get it today, but the very next segment, right before the Mishnah next week, we're going to talk about this question. It's a whole nuanced question, David, about whether or not this touches on ribis. And you're going to see what's very interesting, a machlokes rishonim, just to give you an interesting preview of how that one side will talk about ribis, and the other rishonim say, namely Rashi, for instance, and the other Rishonim, and get a load of this, the other Rishonim say, it can't be ribis because it's in the wrong parak. The Perek of Ribbis is next week. Is the pay is Eitul Meshach. We're not talking about Ribbis in Hazov. That's the answer to a question. Amazing that the Rishonim say it can't be Ribbis. It's out of order. This case can't be Ribbis simply because it's in the wrong Perek. I mean, that's unheard of. But that's the discussion. Again, I want to show you sometimes the discussion in the Gemara gets really, really very sharp. Okay. Anyway, Mitzvah, we'll talk about that next week. But look, this is a phenomenal discussion because we can go around and around asking ourselves these questions, and they're practical questions, everyday questions of Mekach and Memker, whether it was 2,000 years ago or today. You know, people buy stocks. You press a button, you buy a stock. I overpaid. I underpaid. Is there shtus? Is there not shtus? I mean, today everything is keherifying. It happens so quickly. Before you know it, you've made a transaction. Was there a halachic challenge to that transaction between two Jews of buying and selling a stock? Is that an issue of oinol? I mean, make no mistake that you know we're still in that parsha. Even though we're dealing in different commodities, those are really very sharp questions. That's why we have halacha today. You have to understand what the basic halacha is and what's allowed, what's not allowed. Anyway, wonderful discussion. So Mitzvah Shem, next week we will pick up from here, and we'll finish this portion, and we'll go on to a new Mishnah. But it's fascinating stuff. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Wait, before you get off, does that mean I can deal with non-Jewish people in business and charge anything I want?
Halachas do not apply to a transaction between a Jew and a non-Jew.
Okay, thank you. Now I'm going to eliminate all my Jewish customers. That way I can charge them.
Right. Okay. Now, let me say from Pi Halacha, this doesn't apply, but we all understand the Indian of Maris Ayin and the Indian of Dina Damach of being comporting with the marketplace, which is why people accuse Jews of being unethical, because they're gouging, right? I mean, that's nothing new.
None of my customers know I'm Jewish, though. My name doesn't give it away.
It does not give it away, right? No, but I'm just saying, as a general matter, is that halacha is halacha. But you also, No,
I was just joking around when I said
no. But David, you make a good point. Is halacha is halacha. But there's also an ethical proportion here that you have to ask yourself: am I doing something that's ethically improper, even though it's not legally improper al pi halacha? Am I violating something ethically that's chil Hashem? Chil Hashem is not a halacha. Chil Hashem is not a black letter doctrine. It permeates everything that we do. Are we doing Chil Hashem? Are we being ethical people? Different question, which we can spend days on. But again, we understand the portion.
Yeah, whatever you do, people know what you do. They'll find out one way or the other. So you're not really
and if they don't, the Rebbeinu Shalom does. So
Right. That's right.
Well.